They say soldiers fight for country, for duty, for the man beside them. But sometimes the fight is for something smaller and heavier: your name. My name is Lieutenant Elena Ward. I am 34 years old, a tactical communications officer with 12 years of service in the United States Army. I've served in 3 war zones, navigated 2 ambushes, and carried bleeding men through sand and silence. But nothing ever prepared me for the quiet war inside a courtroom. The air was too clean. Courtrooms in military bases smell of polish and punishment: polished shoes, polished wood, polished lies, the kind that come dressed in pressed uniforms and family names. I sat at the back of the room, not in the defendant's chair, not on the witness stand, but close enough to both. Rows of officers, tribunal members, and observers filled the benches. A few faces I recognized, fewer still who'd meet my eye. Up front stood my brother, Captain Jason Ward. He wore the medal I earned. It hung from his chest like a seal of truth, gleaming under the courtroom lights, brighter than it ever had the right to shine. He stood tall, shoulders back, eyes steady. The perfect son, the decorated hero. The man who, according to official records, saved 22 soldiers in Operation Ridgeback when command collapsed and the mission teetered on failure. Only he hadn't. I had, but there was no mention of my name in the citations. Not in the press release. Not in the email that came from command. Not even in the newspaper clipping my mother framed above her fireplace. I remembered that photo clearly: Jason in dress blues, smiling modestly, the medal centered perfectly between his lapels. My mother had circled the headline with a red pen: Jason Ward, our hometown hero. She sent it to me overseas. No note, just the clipping. Like a declaration I was supposed to accept. And I almost did. I almost let it go, until the footage surfaced. Until someone from my unit, a corporal named Reyes, sent me a file. Helmet cam footage. Glitchy, shaky, but undeniable. It showed the moment we lost contact with command, the firefight that broke out on the ridge. The chaos as men bled, screamed, scrambled for cover. And it showed my voice. Clear, direct, cutting through the static. Alpha 4, move to your 9. I've got air on standby. Reyes, stabilize Kepler. Med evac in 6 minutes. Copy that. Jason's voice didn't enter until long after. He was in shock, frozen behind the burned-out Jeep. I was the one with the field map in hand. I was the one calling airstrike coordinates while pressing a bandage to Sergeant Finn's chest. And yet, here we were, in court. Because when I filed an internal complaint, quietly, respectfully, by the book, I was told I had misremembered the sequence of events, that the official after-action report was thorough, accurate, and final. Because Jason had written it. Because Jason had omitted me. Because Jason had always known how to shine and how to keep me in his shadow. A bell chimed. The military tribunal entered. Everyone stood. Even me. Jason didn't look back. Why would he? He had already erased me once. Why stop now? The judge, an old Marine colonel with a face carved by years of duty and disappointment, nodded as we sat. His gaze swept the room like a drone scanning for heat. This is an evidentiary review concerning Operation Ridgeback, he began. At the center, a question of authorship, action, and honor. 3 words. Authorship, action, honor. Everything I had lived through in one sentence. Jason's lawyer stood first, a tall man in a dark uniform with silver stripes and a voice made for radio. He spoke of Jason's leadership, of his years of service, of how in the chaos of the ridge it was his clarity that saved lives. No one interrupted. No one questioned the record. Then it was our turn. My lawyer, Lieutenant Commander Mays, rose. She didn't posture, didn't perform. She simply placed a flash drive on the evidence table. We request the court review a submitted video file from Corporal Reyes's helmet cam, dated, time-stamped, and geolocated to the ridge in question. The judge raised an eyebrow. Have the contents been verified? Yes, Your Honor. Metadata confirms origin and integrity. I didn't look at Jason. I didn't have to. I could feel the heat rise from his direction, because he knew what was coming. The truth doesn't arrive like thunder. It hums low and steady just beneath the noise of power, but when it rises, it leaves nothing standing. The clerk plugged in the drive. The lights dimmed. The screen brightened. Static. Gunfire. Screams. Then my voice. Alpha 4 moved to your 9. Jason flinched. A few heads turned. My voice again louder this time, layered over chaos air support, inbound ETA 6 hold positions. Silence swept the courtroom. I didn't smile. I didn't cry. I sat there spine straight, breath still, heart steady. Because this wasn't the climax. This was only the opening note. The war for my name had just begun. We called it Ridgeback. A dust-covered stretch of high ground with poor visibility, unpredictable winds, and a reputation for swallowing convoys whole. Satellite maps showed nothing but rock. Intel said there were no hostiles within 20 kilometers. Intel was wrong. We rolled in with a recon team of 25. I was assigned as tactical communications, but that day, titles didn't matter. That day, the Earth split the sky, burned, and the mission fell apart. The first shot hit our lead vehicle. It wasn't the sound that shook me. It was the silence right after. That hollow pause when adrenaline kicks in and everything slows. I remember the smell of burning rubber metal twisted by force. I remember Reyes screaming for cover. Sergeant Finn already bleeding out beside the scorched Humvee. I remember Jason, standing still. He had command. He had the stripes, the map, the chain of command. But when the shots started, he froze. I don't say that to shame him. I say that because it's the truth. War doesn't care about rank. It doesn't care who your father was or what medals you earned in peacetime. When the bullets came down like rain, I didn't think. I moved. I pulled Finn behind the second truck, applied pressure with one hand while grabbing the radio with the other. Static. I adjusted frequencies. Command was gone, jammed, or out of range. Ward. What the hell do we do? Someone shouted. Jason didn't answer. I did. Form staggered cover southbound. Reyes left flank. Lewis returned fire suppressive. I'm calling for air. I don't remember how many minutes passed. 3-5 times stopped tracking. But I remember the sound of Jason's voice. Flat. Shaking. Elena, you got this. That was the only thing he said to me during the firefight. I nodded, still pressing the bandage against Finn's side. Just keep your damn head down. The medic was down. So was our drone operator. I redirected their comms gear, patched the signal through auxiliary uplink, and got through to aerial command. Whiskey Ridge Fire Grid, Alpha Zulu 2. Friendly units, north. Repeat, friendly units, north. The jet came screaming overhead 30 seconds later. Fire fell on the ridge. Not chaos. Precision. Enough to break their line. The rest is recorded in Reyes's cami dragging Sergeant Finn across the ridge under cover of smoke. Jason walking behind me, rifle up but not fired. No orders. No command voice. Just following. By the time we regrouped and evac arrived, 6 were wounded, none dead. That was a miracle. But I didn't expect miracles at home. The debrief came 2 days later. I was in the field hospital with a dislocated shoulder, wrapped ribs and bruises in places I didn't know could bruise. Jason walked in with a clipboard and a tired grin. Want to co-write the AAR, he asked. I nodded, too tired to argue. I trusted him. He was my brother. He wrote the report. I never saw it. 3 weeks later, I got transferred. No ceremony, no citation, no mention of Ridgeback. I assumed it was all still classified. Then the press release dropped. Captain Jason Ward, hero of Ridgeback Ridge. My breath left me like a punch to the gut. I stared at the photo. His stance was familiar. The smile less so. There was a quote below. When command broke down, Captain Ward took charge and directed the defense. He coordinated air support, stabilized casualties, and personally ensured the safety of every soldier on that ridge. I read it twice, 3 times. I said nothing. Not yet. Our mother called that night. She didn't ask how I was. She only said, "You should be proud of your brother." The general himself called to thank him. I nodded. Bit my tongue, the same tongue that had once bled trying to pronounce my first words. Jason was the golden boy. He always had been. The varsity star. The honor graduate. The one who got the front seat and the last piece of cake. And me, I was the quiet one. The listener. The shadow. But even shadows grow tired of being ignored, especially when they're the ones holding the light. 2 months passed before Reyes sent me the footage. "I figured you'd want to see this," his message said. "I kept it off grid. But if you ever decide to say something, this might help." I watched it alone in my barrack room. Watched myself saving lives. Watched my brother standing behind me. Watched the truth with my own eyes. I sat in silence for a long time after. Then I opened a blank document. Titled it, "Formal Request for Review of Command Citation, Operation Ridgeback." Typed 1 sentence. "I respectfully request this tribunal investigate potential inaccuracies in the after-action report filed by Captain Jason Ward regarding actions attributed to him during Operation Ridgeback dated." I attached the footage, hit send, and then I waited. The first reply came 3 days later. It wasn't from Jason. It wasn't from command. It was from an internal review officer named Leslie. Cole Brenner, Office of Military Integrity. It read, "Lieutenant Ward, your request has been received. Due to the nature of your submission, we have initiated a preliminary inquiry. You will be contacted for testimony. This investigation is to remain confidential." Confidential. That word echoed in my chest like a warning. Because in the military, confidential rarely means protected. It means contained, managed, minimized. Still, I waited. I gave them the benefit of the doubt because that's what soldiers do. We believe in the chain of command even when it coils around your throat. I didn't hear from Jason. Not for 2 weeks. Not until he showed up at my base unannounced in full dress uniform. He waited for me outside the comm center. "Hey," he said casually, like we were just 2 siblings catching up after a long deployment. "Mind if we talk?" I led him to the back lot behind the barracks. Fewer eyes, fewer ears. He didn't waste time. "You submitted a complaint." I didn't answer. "You attached footage." Still nothing. He exhaled like someone deflating. "Elena, what do you want?" I turned to him. Calm, direct. "I want the truth to have my name." He laughed short and bitter. "You want credit?" "You're serious. I want it corrected." He stepped forward. "You do realize what you're doing, right? This isn't just about a medal. It's about reputation. It's about the family, about the ward name." And there it was. The thing he'd always cared about more than integrity image. I folded my arms. The ward name doesn't mean much if it's built on lies. Jason's voice dropped. "They'll crucify you. You're trying to take down a decorated officer with video evidence. You're going to look jealous, vindictive, unstable." I stepped closer. "You froze on that ridge, Jason. You didn't lead. You followed. And you erased me because you knew deep down you couldn't live with being second." His jaw twitched. He didn't deny it. He just said, "You're making a mistake. Don't say I didn't warn you." And then he walked away. The inquiry moved faster than I expected. I was summoned to Fort Gray for an interview with the review panel. 4 officers, 1 civilian representative, all stone-faced. I sat straight, spoke clearly, provided the names of those who were there, gave timestamps, listed the radio calls I made, described the formation shift, the fire zone, the casualties, the airstrike coordination. No theatrics, just facts. The panel said nothing when I finished, just thanked me and dismissed me. I was halfway to the parking lot when a voice called out, "Lieutenant Ward." I turned. Colonel Ford. He had been present at the tribunal. He nodded once. I was on the oversight committee for Ridgeback. I read the report Jason submitted. And he paused. "Let's just say, your footage told a very different story." He handed me a small envelope. "Official orders. The tribunal has escalated the review to a public hearing. You'll be notified when to appear." I opened it. The seal of the Army Judge Advocate General's Corps stared back at me. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in my bunk staring at the ceiling fan, the blades spinning like questions. What if they turned on me? What if they said it wasn't enough? What if Jason spun it, said, I doctored the footage, said it was all some emotional delusion, but then I remembered Finn's face. Pale, bloodied, looking up at me as I held pressure on his chest and whispered, "You're gonna be okay. Just breathe with me." And I remembered Reyes handing me that USB and saying, "The world needs to know." I remembered the truth. And I let that be my armor. 2 days before the hearing, the Army Media Office released a statement. A formal review has been initiated concerning potential discrepancies in the commendation record of Captain Jason Ward regarding Operation Ridgeback. The Army takes such allegations seriously. A hearing will be held before the military tribunal. Just like that, the story was out. Jason's face vanished from recruitment posters. The press started circling. Military blogs speculated. Some praised me for coming forward. Others accused me of sabotaging a hero's legacy. My inbox flooded. But one message stood out. It came from Sergeant Linda Hale, a medic who had been on the ridge. "I saw what you did. I saw who saved us. If you need someone to testify, I'm ready. You shouldn't have to fight this alone." I stared at the screen for a long time. Then I typed, "Thank you. I'll send your name to the board. And Sergeant, welcome back into the fight." The hearing was scheduled. Open tribunal. Public record. Witnesses allowed. And this time, they couldn't silence me. Not behind closed doors. Not with redacted pages. Not with polished speeches. This time, I was going to stand and speak, and let the truth play loud. The medal didn't matter anymore, but what it stood for, that was mine. And I was taking it back. The day of the tribunal felt like walking into a storm I'd trained for my whole life, except this one didn't come with battle drills or armor. It came with silent stares, and the weight of everyone who ever said I should stay quiet. I arrived in my dress uniform. No medals, no ribbons. Just the truth, and a USB drive tucked into my inner pocket like a final round. The hearing was held at the Central Military Tribunal in Arlington, a gray building with a reputation as cold as its stone walls. The kind of place where careers ended quietly and reputations shattered without a sound. I stepped into the hall. Wooden benches, polished floors. The room was already filling officers, journalists, advisors. Some from my unit. Some I hadn't seen since deployment. But all of them knew why they were here. Jason sat near the front, surrounded by his legal counsel. His posture was perfect. His face unreadable. But I could see the tension in his shoulders, the slight clench of his jaw. He hadn't expected it to get this far. He thought I'd fold. He thought wrong. The panel entered 3 high-ranking officers and 1 civilian advisor. The judge advocate Colonel Reeds called the room to order. Today's hearing concerns the commendation and official report filed for Operation Ridgeback. The tribunal will review the claim of Lieutenant Elena Ward that the citation awarded to Captain Jason Ward was based on a misrepresentation of action and authorship. Jason's attorney stood first. A sharp man, polished, the kind who smiled while cutting you in half. He opened with poise. "Captain Ward has served honorably. He did what any leader would do, filed a report after a chaotic mission. If there were omissions, they were not deliberate but the result of confusion under fire. And this is a family matter twisted into a court dispute. He turned subtly, gesturing toward me. We must be careful not to let personal dynamics contaminate military record. There it was. Not an attack. A discredit disguised as diplomacy. I stayed quiet. Because my words were coming. Then it was my lawyer's turn. Lieutenant Commander Mays rose. Unlike Jason's attorney, she didn't project charm. She projected steel. She walked to the center, inserted the USB into the console, and spoke without looking at notes. Your Honors, what you are about to see is unedited helmet cam footage from Corporal Reyes recorded during Operation Ridgeback. It shows the chain of command breakdown. It shows the tactical coordination. And most importantly, it shows who gave the orders. She clicked play. The screen lit up behind her. The video began. Darkness, dust, gunfire, screams, and then my voice. Alpha 4, move to your 9. I've got air on standby. Reyes, stabilize Kepler. Med evac in 6 minutes. Copy that. In the footage, I crouched behind a burned-out vehicle, blood streaked across my face, radio in one hand, field map in the other. I was calling airstrikes, dragging soldiers, assigning positions. Jason appeared on screen but not speaking. Just moving behind me. Silent. Wide-eyed. The room didn't move. The sound of my voice filled the chamber. I looked at the tribunal. They weren't blinking. One officer leaned forward, eyes locked on the screen. Then the moment came where I requested air support, spelled the grid-confirmed coordinates. The jet's pass, the explosion on the ridge, the shift in momentum. And then, my voice again. Hold. We're pushing on my mark. 3, 2, go. I heard someone in the back row inhale sharply. The footage faded to black. Silence. But not the kind that follows confusion, the kind that follows clarity. Mays stepped forward again. This footage is time-stamped. It predates the after-action report by 48 hours. And it directly contradicts the narrative filed by Captain Ward. Jason's lawyer stood. Objection. There's no way to prove this wasn't coordinated post-mission to mislead. The civilian panelist interrupted. That's enough. Her voice cut clean. Lieutenant Ward, Colonel Reed said you may approach the stand. I rose, walked with steady steps. My palms were dry, my voice ready. I sat, looked at the panel, and began. During Operation Ridgeback, I assumed tactical command when our CO was taken out. I coordinated air support, triaged wounded, and directed a fallback. I wrote my own report. It was never filed. Captain Jason Ward submitted his report. My name was absent. I paused. Not forgotten. Removed. They asked questions. Why hadn't I filed a formal complaint earlier? I told them about my injuries, about the transfer, about the medal ceremony I wasn't invited to. They asked if I had personal conflict with Jason. I said nothing personal, could rewrite footage. Then they asked the question I dreaded. Lieutenant Ward, do you believe your brother intentionally took credit for your actions? I took a breath. I believe silence is a choice, and his silence gave him a medal. When I stepped down, I didn't look at Jason. He still hadn't spoken. But I could feel the shift. The courtroom wasn't on his side anymore, because they didn't need my voice. They had seen mine on tape. As the panel recessed for deliberation, I returned to my seat. A figure leaned forward behind me. Sergeant Linda Hale. She whispered, "We saw it. We always knew. We just never thought you'd get this far." I whispered back, "I'm not done yet." Because I wasn't. This wasn't about stripping a medal. This was about restoring a name. Mine. The tribunal took recess. The audience was asked to step out, but no one moved. Even the officers in the back row remained frozen, as if rising would break the gravity of what they'd just seen. Outside the courtroom, the hallway buzzed with whispers. They played the footage. She was the one giving the orders. Did Jason say anything? But he hadn't. Not a word. He had sat through the entire playback like a man watching a tower collapse, one he thought was fireproof because he built it himself. I waited in a holding room while the tribunal reviewed the evidence. No phone, no updates. Just 4 gray walls and the hum of fluorescent light. I thought of the last words my father said before he died. Jason's the one with a future. You're brave, Elena, but bravery doesn't get you remembered. He was wrong. Bravery wasn't about medals. It was about standing when silence was safer. About walking into a room where your voice might be dismissed but speaking anyway. There was a knock. A junior officer opened the door. "They're ready for you, ma'am." I smoothed my uniform and walked back down the hall. The air inside the courtroom had changed. Still quiet, but now it was a charged stillness like static before lightning. The panel had returned. The presiding officer, Colonel Reeds, adjusted his glasses. This tribunal has reviewed video and testimony provided by Lieutenant Elena Ward and supporting personnel. We have also compared this evidence with the official after-action report filed by Captain Jason Ward. He paused, then looked at Jason. "Captain Ward, you have the right to speak before a decision is rendered. Would you like to say anything?" Jason stood slowly. Every eye in the room followed him. For a second I saw a flash of something: regret. Shame. Or was it just fear? He walked to the center, straightened his shoulders, and looked at the tribunal. "I misrepresented the events of Ridgeback," he said. Gasps echoed behind me, soft, but real. He kept going. "I let the narrative favor me. I knew the footage existed, but I didn't think it would surface. And I didn't think," he turned, slightly met my eyes, first time in weeks. "I didn't think Elena would challenge it." Silence. No apology. Just admission. He looked back at the panel. "That's all." Colonel Reeds gave a short nod. "Noted." He turned to the audience. "Let the record show Captain Jason Ward has confirmed the misattribution of tactical command. In light of this and the supporting evidence, the tribunal finds Lieutenant Elena Ward to be the rightful coordinating officer responsible for the operational success of Ridgeback." He paused again. "And as such, the medal awarded to Captain Ward is hereby rescinded, effective immediately." A stunned silence hung in the air. Then Colonel Reed stood. He picked up a small box from the table. He descended from the bench and walked straight to me. The audience began to rise slowly, like a wave of uniforms finding their feet in unison. He opened the box. The metal gleamed inside, weighty, still warm from the lie it once carried. "Lieutenant Ward," he said, voice steady, "on behalf of the United States Army, I present you with the Distinguished Service Cross. For extraordinary heroism under fire, and for leadership that saved lives when all else had failed." He pinned it on me. Not just on my uniform, but on my name. And behind him, the entire room stood. All of them. Commanders, lieutenants, NCOs, even the very men who once doubted me. Some saluted. Others simply placed their hands over their hearts. But none of them sat down. I looked at Jason. He wasn't crying. He wasn't fuming. He just stood there, motionless, watching a story finally shift back to the truth. And I realized something: he didn't lose a medal today. He lost a myth. Afterward, I walked into the hallway. Reporters were waiting. So were a few of my unit members. Reyes clapped once. "Told you it would hit like hell." Linda Hale hugged me hard, whispering, "You gave us back something we didn't know we lost." And then from behind the crowd, a quiet voice said, "Elena." I turned. It was Major Carr, the surgeon from Ridgeback's evac team. He held out a small envelope. Inside was a photo. Me kneeling beside Sergeant Finn, radio in one hand, the other pressing down on a field bandage. Jason was blurry in the background. The caption was scribbled in pen. "She held us together." I closed my eyes for a moment, holding it to my chest. That night, I didn't celebrate. I didn't drink. I didn't post a statement or speak to the press. I sat in my apartment, stared at the medal on the table, and thought about Ridgeback, about Finn, about Kepler, about the ones who lived and the ones who didn't. The medal didn't belong to me alone. It belonged to all of us. But now it had the right name on it. And sometimes that's the beginning of justice, not its end. In the military, victory is rarely clean. Even when the truth is revealed, there are aftershocks, some loud, some quiet, some that don't surface for weeks. The day after the tribunal, my name was in every internal military bulletin. Lieutenant Elena Ward awarded Distinguished Service Cross after tribunal review. Commendation misattribution corrected in Ridgeback case. Captain Jason Ward reprimanded for misreporting command structure. The language was precise, clinical. No headlines screamed, no interviews aired, just a handful of words buried between status reports and logistics memos. And yet, those words changed everything. Jason was transferred. Administrative leave pending reassignment to non-command responsibilities. It wasn't a court-martial. He wasn't dishonorably discharged. The Army doesn't always punish you with expulsion. Sometimes it punishes you with irrelevance. We hadn't spoken since the hearing, but 2 days later a manila envelope appeared on my bunk. No return address. Inside was the original unedited after-action report from Ridgeback, the one I'd written. My name was at the top. There was a sticky note attached. One word. Sorry. No signature, no plea. Just one syllable on cheap yellow paper. I didn't frame it, but I didn't throw it away either. What came next wasn't fame. It wasn't parades or public recognition. What came next was quiet. The kind of quiet that follows storm and smoke, the kind where you count the wounded and build again. I was reassigned to the National Training Center in California. A desk job. Leadership rotation. They wanted me to mentor incoming officers in tactical crisis command. Some called it a promotion. Some called it exile. I didn't care. All I wanted was to make sure no soldier, especially no woman, was ever erased from the record again. 3 weeks into the assignment, I was approached by a young second lieutenant. Nervous, green, still adjusting to her uniform. Ma'am? I read the Ridgeback case, she said. They don't teach us that kind of leadership in the manuals. I tilted my head. What kind of leadership? The kind that doesn't need permission. I smiled. Then you already know more than most. Behind the scenes, the fallout rippled wider than I expected. 3 more female soldiers came forward with misattributed reports. 2 had been denied commendations. 1 had been forced to resign quietly after breaking chain of command when she took charge during a medevac collapse. Their cases were reopened. Not because of me, but because the silence broke. And sometimes that's all it takes. Not a lawsuit, not a speech. Just one woman who doesn't flinch when the ground shakes. I received a letter from Reyes. He had been promoted sergeant now and transferred to Germany. Inside the envelope was a photo of his new squad grinning like idiots under a tattered American flag. There was a sticky note attached. We all saw you that day, but now the world does too. Keep leading. I pinned the photo beside my desk, right under a map of Ridgeback, right where I could see it every morning. And then there was my mother. She didn't call, but a box arrived from her house, my old bedroom. Inside were stacks of newspaper clippings she had saved over the years. Jason's awards, Jason's scholarships, Jason's face on every wall of memory. And at the very bottom, folded, almost forgotten, was a program from my high school piano recital, a handwritten note in the corner. Elena, I forgot how strong your hands are. It wasn't quite an apology, but it was something. Late one night, I sat alone in the training center music room. Old upright piano, out of tune, dust on the keys. I didn't play to be heard. I didn't play for performance. I played for breath, for memory, for the ones who couldn't speak. And when the last note faded, I whispered to the empty room, I'm still here. There's something strange about surviving a battle you were never allowed to fight in public. Once the tribunal ruled in my favor, people expected I'd feel victorious, vindicated. But what I felt was more complicated. The medal now rested in a velvet case on my shelf. Its inscription had been re-engraved. Lieutenant Elena Ward, Operation Ridgeback for Valor Under Fire. But I didn't feel its weight the same way Jason did. For him, the medal was a symbol of legacy. For me, it was a correction. Not a triumph, just the removal of a lie. At the training center, word spread quickly. Some cadets saluted me with a little extra intention. Others averted their eyes, unsure of whether to approach the woman who'd taken her own brother to court. I became an uncomfortable truth in a system that wasn't used to being challenged from within. The colonel who ran the center pulled me aside one morning. You're a hell of an officer, he said, but don't expect people to thank you for making them feel exposed. I nodded. I'm not here for thanks. He looked at me for a long moment. Then keep doing what you're doing. I began mentoring younger officers, especially women. We didn't talk about Ridgeback. Not directly, but we talked about decision-making under pressure. We talked about what to do when your voice is the only one that can cut through chaos. One cadet, barely 23, asked me one afternoon, what if the system doesn't listen? I answered without hesitation, then you speak louder, or smarter, or in a way that leaves a record they can't erase. She nodded, and I could see the fire in her eyes, the kind of fire I once carried to war and then into court. Meanwhile, Jason disappeared from the spotlight. He took a teaching post at a logistics school in Kentucky. Low profile, no command, no interviews, no public statements. But he wasn't disgraced. Not officially. That's the thing about quiet betrayals. Sometimes the system doesn't punish you. It just forgets you. And sometimes that's worse. 2 months after the tribunal, I got a call from Colonel Reeds, the one who presided over the hearing. Ward, he said, we're compiling a case study on Ridgeback, not for press, for training. I sat up. Why? Because people need to understand how it happened, how it was missed, and how you stopped it. He paused. We'd like your permission to use the footage. I didn't hesitate. Yes, but only if you include everyone. Reyes, Linda Hale, Sergeant Finn. I want the narrative to belong to the team, not just me. There was a silence on the line. Then, that's exactly why it needs to be you. A week later, I stood in front of a class of officer candidates. The footage played behind me. I didn't narrate it. I didn't dramatize it. I let the images speak for themselves. Bullets and sand smoke on the ridge, my voice over the comms. When it ended, the room was silent. A cadet raised his hand. Ma'am, why didn't you just let it go? You still had your career. You still had your honor. I looked at him. Not angry. Just steady. Because my name is not a rumor. It's not a footnote. It's the one thing I've carried through every deployment, every loss, every breath under fire. And I refuse to let anyone else wear it for applause. That evening, I received a message from Jason. It was short. I watched your training session today. They recorded it. You were always better than me. I just couldn't admit it until the whole world had to watch. I'm sorry. I didn't reply. Some things are better left unanswered. Not because I don't forgive, but because forgiveness is a process, not a paragraph. That night, I opened the metal case again, stared at it in the soft light of my desk lamp. I didn't feel pride. I didn't feel revenge. I felt return, like something that had always been mine had finally come home. I closed the case, locked it in my drawer, because I didn't need to wear it to remember what I did. What mattered wasn't the medal. It was the fact that the myth had broken and my name was still standing. Not all justice ends in silence. Some of it ripples, And in the months after the tribunal, those ripples turned into waves I never expected. One morning, I opened my email to find a message from a name I didn't recognize, Specialist Amina Drayton, stationed overseas in Djibouti. Ma'am, we watched the Ridgeback footage in our leadership briefing today. I just wanted to say, thank you for fighting for your voice. It reminded me not to shrink from mine. A second message came an hour later, then another, and another. Soldiers, officers, medics, women, men, all saying the same thing in different ways. I thought I was the only one. I never spoke up, but I wish I had. You reminded me that it's not weakness to ask for your name back. I wasn't a hero to them. I was a mirror. The Army released a revised commendation protocol 3 months later. No longer could a single officer submit an after-action report without a verification process involving multiple team members. Each commendation would now require corroborating statements from no fewer than 3 independent witnesses. The unofficial name of the new process, the Ward Rule. They didn't tell me. I heard it through another officer. I didn't ask for the credit. But for the first time in a long while, I felt something close to peace. Then came the letter I didn't expect. From Sergeant Finn. He was in recovery. Still limping. Still scarred. But alive. I was out cold when you pulled me off that ridge. They told me it was Jason. I believed them. But then I saw the video. I heard your voice. You saved me, Lieutenant. And I'm sorry I didn't remember sooner. He attached a photo. His son. Newborn. Swaddled. Smiling. His name is Elias. Not after me. After the woman who gave me the chance to be his father. I stared at the screen for a long time. That photo, that line. It broke me open in a way the tribunal never could. Because this wasn't about medals. This was about the people we get to come home for. Meanwhile, Jason stayed quiet. No interviews, no new assignments, no promotions. But every few weeks, a small donation would hit a new fund the Army had started for whistleblower legal support. Always anonymous. But I knew the handwriting on the note that came with the first one, for those who speak when it's hardest. J.W. I never told anyone. Some debts are paid slowly, not in headlines, but in habits. Eventually, I was offered a command of my own team, my own mission. No shadows this time. I hesitated. Not because I doubted my readiness, but because I understood now the cost of leading when the world is watching, and when it isn't. But then I thought of that young lieutenant who asked what to do when the system doesn't listen. And of Specialist Drayton. And of Elias, a child who'd grow up because someone fought hard enough to come back for him. I said yes. Not for revenge, not even for legacy, but because when you survive the silence, your voice becomes a lighthouse. On the day I took command, I didn't bring the medal. I brought the photo from Ridgeback. Me mid-evac shouting into the wind. Jason blurry in the background. I pinned it to the inside of my locker. A reminder that you can be forgotten, but still unforgettable. My first day as commanding officer of the 201th Tactical Coordination Unit didn't begin with a speech. It began with silence. I stood in front of the platoon, 27 soldiers, most younger than I had been at Ridgeback. Some looked curious, others skeptical. None of them knew the whole story. And that's how I wanted it, because I wasn't here to be remembered. I was here to lead. I walked among them as they ran drills, corrected posture, adjusted grip, observed under pressure. I didn't bark orders, I gave them space to think. By noon, one of them, Private Miller, asked, "Ma'am, did you really take your own brother to court?" I paused, looked him straight in the eye. Yes. He blinked. Did you win? No, I said. The truth did. That was all. He nodded, more serious now. That night, I stayed late in my office. Papers, rosters, training schedules, and a single envelope on my desk, no return address. I opened it. Inside, a simple program from a community center in Kentucky. At the top, Veterans Reintegration Piano Workshop. Beneath it, in soft typewriter font, Instructor Jason Ward, Wednesdays 6 to 8 p.m., open to all former service members learning to speak again through sound. There was a photo stapled to the back. Jason, older, thinner, surrounded by 4 veterans, hands on keys. He wasn't at the front of the room. He was sitting among them. The caption handwritten in the corner: "Mistakes are where the melody starts." I didn't smile, but I didn't cry either. A week later, I called the program director. Didn't give my name, just asked if they needed sheet music. He said yes. I sent a folder of old compositions, some handwritten from my days in the desert. One of them was titled, "For the Ones Who Were There." I signed it only E. Ward. No comment, no note, no forgiveness. Just the music. Meanwhile, the Ward rule began expanding. JAG officers began using it in lectures. A Naval Academy professor emailed me requesting permission to include Ridgeback in a textbook. And in the background, the fund I never meant to create kept growing. Whistleblowers, undocumented medics, non-commissioned officers whose reports had been ignored, all found their way to our inbox. Not for revenge, but for restoration. We helped them write the truth in permanent ink. One day, Megan, younger sister of Captain Kepler, the one who nearly died at Ridgeback, wrote me. He never talked about that mission. Until the video came out. He played it for our family, didn't say a word. At the end, he looked at our father and said, "She's the reason I'm still here. Thank you for saving my brother." No medal matched that. No ribbon came close. In late fall, I traveled to Washington for a private military ethics symposium. I was asked to speak about courage in chain of command. I stood at the podium in a modest hall. No cameras, no press, just 40 officers. I didn't begin with Ridgeback. I began with a truth. Sometimes leadership means doing your duty. Other times it means naming the person who didn't and risking everything to do it. The Army taught me how to fight, but war taught me how to tell the truth. And both taught me this: no one should have to choose between loyalty and integrity. If they ever do, make sure your name lands with the latter. The room was still. A colonel in the front row wiped his glasses. A captain scribbled something in his notes, then stopped and just listened. That was enough. Later that evening, I received one more message from Jason. This one was a voicemail. "I still don't expect forgiveness, but I think I finally understand what you meant about silence being a choice. I made the wrong one for too long. If I could go back, I'd let the truth speak the first time. But since I can't, I'm just going to keep helping others find their voice." That's what your name did, Elena. Even after everything, I'm proud to be your brother. He hung up. I never called back. I didn't have to. Some chapters don't need replies, only closure. That night, I placed the voicemail on a secure drive. Labeled the file "Unplayed Note" for archive. Because not every act of redemption plays on stage. Some live in the margins. And still, they matter. Years passed. I didn't count them in birthdays or deployments. I counted them in breath. In voices no longer afraid to speak. In names finally written beside the actions they performed. In medals that finally went to the right chest. I stayed in the Army longer than I ever planned, not because I owed it anything, but because I had more to give, more to teach, more to protect, more truths to clear the way for. We created something called the Ledger Project, a quiet initiative. It wasn't flashy, just a secured, confidential platform within military channels where any soldier, medic, or civilian contractor could submit unfiled truths, witness reports, suppressed footage, lost citations. We matched them with advocates, legal mental health communications. We didn't make noise. We made corrections, and people showed up. Corporal Liu, who was never credited for saving 3 lives during a compound collapse in Kandahar, Sergeant Diaz, who was disqualified from promotion because he reported a false logbook. A mechanic named Tompkins, who single-handedly rerouted fuel logistics during an ambush, saving an entire unit from being stranded. Each one of them thought their story was forgotten. Until we showed them it wasn't. And all the while the name Ward evolved. Once it stood for confusion. A family fractured. A court battle. Now it stood for recorded truth. For integrity with muscle. For second chances. One spring afternoon I returned to Ridgeback. Not on orders, on memory. There was nothing left now. The outpost had been cleared. Nature took it back. But I stood on the same ridge, closed my eyes, and listened. Not for gunfire, not for silence, but for the memory of breath, the rhythm I once taught a wounded team to hold on to. 6 counts of life. That day I had given orders, saved lives, been erased. But now there were clinics using my training cadence in PTSD breathing therapy. Now there were manuals citing the Ward 6 regulation for field-based command validation. Now there were soldiers who no longer had to wait years to be heard. That was the legacy. Not a medal in a drawer, but a door that stayed open. Back home, the piano still sat in my den. Keys a little dusty. One still chipped from the time I moved apartment solo. I taught myself to play again. Not to perform, just to feel the weight of a note when it's yours. One evening, a young officer from the Ledger Project came by to drop off documentation. She saw the piano and smiled. "You still play, ma'am?" I nodded. She sat down beside me. "I've never learned." So I placed her hand gently over middle C. Said, "Start here. Breathe with it." And we did. 2 voices. No audience. Only the sound of learning something true. That night, I opened the original report from Ridgeback, the one I had written. I scanned the first line. This is not a story about valor. It's a record of breath held and returned in fire. I closed it and filed it away. Not under war, but under truth verified. Because medals fade, myths collapse, but names when defended endure. And justice, if you guard it long enough, learns how to echo.